Before we get into that.
Before we get into what?
The charging of topic.
Oh, but look at
colored makeup. You are just happy. I wiped off everything.
Hi, you wiped it off. Greetings. Thank you so much for joining me yet again for today's episode on circles and squares. It's a soul fit. My name is Mkhulu Makanya, and I'm happy to be your host. I trust all is well with you and all is well with the family and the kids, and then that you're safe wherever you may be. In today's topic, we are going to look at the effects, the functionality, and the relevance of the Black church in our community, particularly as it relates to Black people. So for people that might not know, Christianity came into Africa via missionaries. People who came literally from the West, white people who came among Black people who said, we've got a new religion to introduce among you. And the religion was used basically for both the good and the bad. And the religion has been with us and gained a lot of followers. To this day, Christianity is the biggest faith or religion in Africa and in South Africa, based on the number of white people who came and introduced the religion to us and converted many of us. And religion has sought to cause divisions among Black people as well, based on the different churches that we attend. It caused divisions based on a clash between Christianity and African spirituality. And so we just want to take the time today to trace our steps to say, how do we exist and coexist with the Christian experience, particularly as it expressed through the church, to say, what kind of function is it, serving today? What is it? What is the purpose today of the church? And how is it affecting the lives of Black people and the Black community? Joining me in this conversation, it is Reverend Sethunya Motlhodi, who is the minister and reverend in the Methodist Church. He's been a minister for 20 years. And I think if you've been a minister for 20 years, you've probably preached over 10,000 sermons. So I'm really hanging out with someone who's really been at it and who has been serving the Black community through the Christian religion. And it is a great honor for me to have him in the space on Circle and Squares. It's a soul fit. I've known him since I was probably age maybe 15, 16, 17, I don't know. I've known him for many years, so I'm really excited and honored to have him in the space. And I feel that he's the relevant person who can shed some wisdom and insight on the topic of what the effects and the relevance of the church is in the Black community. Ndate Muruti, I greet you. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to hang out today.
No, thanks, and thank you for the invite.
Yes. First and foremost, I felt that you were the relevant person to have this conversation with because of your unorthodox number one sermons. It is difficult to pick up doctrine, for example, when you preach. I personally picked up a lot of, you lean more into inspiration than doctrine to begin with. Number two, I have noticed how you have struggled to align yourself with the institution of church based on your outlook. So it is that sense of courage and a willingness to come across as crazy that put me in a position where I invite you today. So just to check in with you, how is your relationship with God currently? How are you doing before we get into the nitty-gritties of our chat?
Thank you. It's interesting that you call me crazy. I think I've grown to be accepted as the crazy one. We have an on and off relationship with God, that relationship of lovers that is sometimes good, sometimes not that good. But most of the time, we wrestle together with God on some difficult issues of life. I think the past 5 years, I've been more angry at God than happy. And I think it is being angry at God that made me to get too close to God. I struggle with a God who, take for instance the story of Job in the Bible. A God who will take everything from me to prove a point. It doesn't make sense to me that for God to prove that he is powerful than the devil, that God will take my children, my wealth that I worked for, just so he proves to the devil that I love him. I just take that to be too extreme. And I've always, in my relationship with God, wrestled with some of the approaches he uses to get our attention. It's one of those things that, like you say, you can't find. I'm not an orthodox preacher. I believe in the liberation of the mind, because if the mind is liberated, then the physical gets easily channeled in the right direction. So yeah, I don't move away from grace, but I think circumstances around me always pushes me to ask the question. I always ask God, why is it that people are suffering when you have promised us prosperity, good life, and all this? So what are the things that one must do to get to benefit from the promises that we have made? I think I trouble God more than any other human being. Yeah, sure.
With your questions of reflection and all of that. But I appreciate the authenticity in your outlook and in how you're interpreting your relationship with God. And I think that's what concerns me most, that when we speak about God and relating with God, there is this need to turn it into a romantic story. And sometimes it's just not.
Yeah, I struggle with people who pretend. I think God knows us, knows our weaknesses, knows our imperfections. God created us. God knows about the days, even today, that I will be here. And I struggle with people who create a sense of perfection when they come to church. And it's not even God who creates this, it's the institution church. Because the institution church creates for me a principle that I must be this particular person to belong to the church. So there must be a dress code, there must be a way to speak, there must be a way to behave. There are certain things that people are trapped. Actually, church as an institution traps people more than any other institution I know, because people are not themselves, And that's why you get shocked when somebody who we believe is a staunch member of the church starts to insult in public or to be themselves, that we get shocked. We get shocked because the person has pretended so well to a point where we believed that the person is actually a good Christian. And the person is actually living according to the standards of the institution called church. Because if you look at people who go to the church on Sunday or any other day, compared to people that Jesus encountered, those are two different groups, because Jesus encountered your West people, yet the church doesn't want to deal with the West. They want to deal with, I always make an example when people ask me, why do I entertain prostitutes? And, when I was doing my honors, I wrote a paper on sexual ethics. And people are like, how do you go and write sexual ethics? I had to meet with prostitutes. I had to ask them questions. Why do they do it? What it takes for them to open up to strangers every day. And people were not happy with my paper because for some reason we have turned sex into a demonic thing, and it's the most nicest thing.
Yeah.
People that God has created, you know. So I always make an example. Ogote, what kind of laundry do you put in the washing machine? It's a dirty laundry. And I've never seen my mother or my wife take dirty laundry or clean laundry out of the wardrobe and put it in the washing machine, you know? And somehow I look at church like that the church must accept people who are struggling with life, not people who are perfect, because the church doesn't need perfect people. Otherwise, there's no need for church. Yes.
So now, naturally, when you are having that love-hate relationship, that wrestling with God, I imagine that at some point then it has to blow out, you know. It challenges how you see other men based on what you're going through. It challenges how you see children, how you see women, how you see the community. So what would you say are the insights that came from that wrestling with God in relation to those that you relate with, the church, the community, perhaps even Black people?
The part of ministry in the Methodist Church, it's formation. So you've got academic training, and then you've got formation. Formation, it's more unscripted. Sure. It's more, what do you see? How does it affect you? And generally, I have been shaped more by interactions with people who helped me make sense of God than interacting with God. So when I wrestle with God naturally, I look at positive things or negative things that help me to interpret my relationship with God. So I come in here, there's a young child, and she all of a sudden draws me close to my imperfections, the child in me. And then I remember that there was a time when I was young and I cared less about things. All I cared about was what I have in my hand. Like when I arrived here and she was just seated there. She didn't move. She didn't move. All she was interested in was what she has in her hand and how it benefits her. And that's how we should be with God. That any other thing around it, it's selfish. But sometimes it's good to be selfish because it then confines you into certain spaces. If you are not selfish, you end up becoming everything to everybody. And once you become everything to everybody, you become nothing to yourself. Actually, we serve a very selfish God who says, I want you to serve me and me alone. So it is those encounters with people that when I think I'm going through hell and I meet somebody, be it in an aircraft or on a queue at Pick and Pay, who tells me that they've seen the West, and I compare that with what I'm going through, I'm like, but I'm ungrateful, you know? It seems like I've not really thanked God enough. So my wrestling with God is always guided by my interaction with people. So there are people who will send me a text on social media inbox and say, you preached a sermon in 2005. And that sermon changed my life. And by that time, I was just preaching. A certain lady inboxed me not long ago. In my life, I've just followed your messages, and your messages changed my life. And I asked, are you Methodist? She says, no, I'm Lutheran, but I actually follow you. So it is such feedback that always holds me together to say, my wrestling with God must not take away the gift that God has been to me through human beings. You know, much as human beings can get to your nerve, but God does use them sometimes to minister. Yeah.
So the black church then comes into the community, to the black community on two levels. The first level, it is that as a social tool that comes to disturb the stability that could have been there. It's these people who are following their own spirituality, and then the church comes in as a social machine or socio-political machine to say, okay, leave what you're doing, this is what you follow. Fine. On a lower level, the church comes in the black community as well as a carrier of values and belief systems to say, this is how you do family, this is how you do relationships according to the Bible, according to Jesus. This is your world outlook, basically. So today we just want to reflect on our existence as black people, particularly in relation to the church. What is your outlook on the relevance of the church in 2024 in relation to black people?
The church is still relevant to black people. As to whether the church occupies the space of relevance is a different question. There were three most important institutions for a black person. It was the church, the school, and the hospital. So when you wake up in the morning and go to church and your grandmother is unable to go for reasons known to her, when you come back, the grandmother will ask you, what did the priest say? Sure. That question was fundamental because if there is a problem of water in the community, maybe the streams have been contaminated, the principal will tell the children at school to say, don't drink the water until the water is cleansed. And the child will get home and tell the mother or the grandmother. And the mother will say, what did the priest say? So the message from the principal, which is the system of education, must be synchronized to the message of the church in the olden days. Because if the priest does not speak to the community issues, then the people do not believe that what the principal says was good. So, you know, when we grew up, there used to be those campaigns, Missless campaign or what. So nurses will come and tell us about this, and then the principal will then enforce the message, and the priest on Sunday will enforce the message. That's how you indoctrinated community, through education, through health, through church. So the church has always been relevant. Over time, the church became an opportune space for corrupt beings who used the vulnerability of those who come to church to scorn them, to defraud them and take stuff from them, which then made the church a bit institution that needs to be questioned. Later then, enlightenment came. And when enlightenment came, it was not as easy as it used to be to preach the message that is convincing. Because in the olden days, people accepted knowledge as information as knowledge. And so never really critiqued. They believed that the priest is at the right space, right mind, right knowledge to dispense the information they were dispensing. With enlightenment, freedom in South Africa, democracy, freedom of speech and everything, people started engaging the subject. Sure. And when people started engaging the subject, it started to become difficult for your ordinary priest to relate with the ordinary member, because the ordinary member was no more just swallowing. They needed time to chew and then to digest, you see. And so these two aspects of priests taking advantage of the people and people becoming more aggressive in terms of information started to create an imbalance for the church. I mean, for goodness sake, it's Sunday, I'm a priest, I'm doing a podcast. that tells you how much shift has happened in the life of the church. In the olden days, on Sunday, bottle stores were closed, malls were closed, shops were closed. Today, we are in competition with all these other things. That tells you that the church then needed to do more than just preach to become important to society, to become relevant to society. So they are, like I said when I started, the church is relevant. The question that we need really to ask is the church aware that its relevance depends on the position it occupies in society? So who I am to you as a representation of the church will define the relevance that I have in your life. You've known me for a long time, and when you thought of this, you thought the person who can perfectly fit here is Motlhodi. That's what it means to be relevant. If I had not made an impact in your life or others, there will be no need for my existence. So everything is relevant in life until that particular thing occupies the relevant space. You know, food is important, but if I'm not hungry, food is irrelevant to me until I need the water. The water is irrelevant, you know. So if for instance, COVID, if the church was not there for the people during COVID, the church will not be recognized as a relevant institution. Black people have benefited from the church because maybe I should say that if my mother did not take me to church, I think I would have lost myself along the way. So that's how important the church is, that my mother enforced this thing. It was not negotiable. It was not whether you like it or not. It was, I lock my house. So everybody must go to church. I look at how I brought up my children with freedom, freedom to engage me, to debate, and all that I have not enforced church. So they have learned to accept God and church as it is. I have a problem with sometimes how they relate with God, because it was their free will choice. And if I could, I would take a little bit of my mother into mixing all these things. But because I thought my mom was wrong in forcing me, I gave too much freedom, and too much freedom created. The third and the last point I want to make is church as institution and church as ecclesiology, because sometimes we talk church as if we talk the same thing. There's a church which is an institution, Methodist Church, Lutheran Church, all these other churches. And the reason people like asking, why do you have so many churches if there's one God? It's exactly what you're talking about, the orthodox, the doctrines, the teachings, because they don't agree with one another on what it means to baptize a child. Then they ended up having breakaway churches. So conflict is part of the fiber of the church. But then there's a ecclesiology, which is the Church of Christ, which the one I prefer most. Because the Church of Christ tells me that if a person is hungry, I must give food. Doesn't say create a committee for food. So there are times where the church, which is the institution church, asks too many questions, which are problematic for me, whereas the Church of Jesus Christ says, are you hungry? Here's bread. You know, there's no the end of story. And for me, that's what the church should be. The church should be, there's a woman with the flow of blood, just heal the woman. Just deal with the woman and stop. As we will ask the questions later, like Jesus, who touched me? I feel like, hey, but the bottom line is the woman is healed. So the institution church for me is sometimes problematic for Black people because it's exclusive. I once met a lady who said to me, who I said, but I haven't seen you in church for a long time. And she was like, I lost my job. No, but that's the reason why, that's more reason why you should be at church. So people will judge me. Like, but why is church making it so difficult for me to exist in my reality of unemployment, you know? But because we have created an elite structure for the people, people don't find church to be relevant anymore. But it is important that the guy from the dusty streets of Mukwen in Tabanju who grew up playing dice has been saved by the grace of God. For me, there's nothing more powerful than that. Yeah. You can have the problems of the institution, we can deal with the institution, but the Church of Jesus Christ is the one that inspires us to have goosebumps, the one that calls us into action, the one that says to us, yes, you are a mess, but you are not a total mess. I can still revive you and bring you into existence. Sure. So in that sense, the church then remains relevant to a black person.
I'm with you. So there are two, I mean, obviously black people will struggle with a lot, but I just want to bring in just two things. And I'd like you to at least try to align the church with these two challenges. The first one is obviously that of unemployment. The socio-political climate in South Africa is such that those who are closer to politicians are more likely to benefit from the government or the ruling party. And then you get those in the periphery who are not as passionate about politics naturally because they don't necessarily benefit, in what way can the church align itself to the people in the periphery of South Africa who do not directly benefit from being, aligned with a political party, for example? Of course, in principle, politics are supposed to exist for all of us. The government is supposed to exist for all of us. But the reality is that there are those who are more closer, and the closer you are, you are more likely to feel the fire and the heat, But for those in the periphery, in what way can the church be relevant to those people and help the majority of the suffering black people in South Africa?
Okay. Well, in my own view, the church actually exists for the periphery, people on the periphery. First, let's define politics. Politics is the issues that concern the citizens. So politicians today are not politicians. You have a former General Secretary of Communist Party who is supposed to be a socialist, championing capitalist ideas. So we have more opportunists than politicians, because our politicians, I don't think they are serious about the life and the issues that concern the citizens. It's more about them than the people. I think the church has itself lost ground in the sense that it takes from the poor than it gives to the poor. In my view, the church should be engaged in partnerships with big establishments to try and bring the moral nature of the church into the business. Because if you look at, I'm currently in the private sector, there are a lot of things that I struggle with because of the space where I am and the person that I am. So being a priest and then having to work in that space, it's a big conflict. But it's conflict that I think I'm managing very well. I have a feeling that the church should be at least a partner here, so that it can benefit my company, that it is the church that says we have 3 young people who needs internship. We have a qualified plumber so that the church is a feeder. And it feeds us people that they have prepared morally to minimize the corruption. So in my view, how state is today, South African state, of course, there's so much corruption that it seems like there's no church. That the people end up using corrupt means to gain access to resources. And I think that's where the church can partner with business on how best we can change the moral thinking, nature, and fiber of society. Two, I think the church is more dependent on members than members dependent on the church. I once asked a question in one of these conferences I addressed. I once asked a question, if your church was to disappear, will the people in that community miss the church? If that church was to die and burn down, will the people of that community benefit? Or ask the question, where is the church? All right? The third thing is that for me, if church is to be relevant to those on the margins and on the periphery, the church should then develop. I mean, there are many FET colleges or schools that are closing down. I don't know why can't church negotiate with the owners to start empowerment programs.
And not another church.
And not another church. You have schools that have been merged with other schools. The building is just standing there. If the church invests and say we're going to raise money to put this building in the right space, and those who can volunteer to teach skills like your plumbing, your electricals, your carpentry, then they do that at a low cost to manage the school and send these people out with a letter of testimony to say, we believe that the person, the head, the heart, and the hands are synchronized and this person can contribute. So if church does not think like an entrepreneur, the church is irrelevant because I'm hungry. There's a beautiful poem. Is it a poem? Well, they've turned it into a poem, but it was a prayer of a Brazilian woman who went to church because she was hungry. Yeah. So she went to church to ask for help, and the church typical response, we will pray for you. The woman then, a few weeks later, wrote a letter to the priest and said to the priest, I was hungry and you closed doors to pray for me. I was sick and you told me about the spiritual health. I was in prison and you told me about the freedom of God. You are so holy, you are so organized, but I'm still hungry. Sure. At the end of the day, you told me all these good things, what the Bible says about spiritual shelter, health and what, but it didn't help me. Yeah. My hunger currently is my problem. I don't want prayers. So for me, if the church does not feed the needs of the people, and the needs of the people is unemployment. Yeah. The needs of the people is poverty. We can't be preaching and preaching when the people are hungry. There's a post on Facebook now that people say the church is expensive. I don't know what it says, but it's more like the church is not for the poor. Yeah. That saddens me because it should be Louis Vuitton that is not for the poor. Sure. It should be Gucci that's not for the poor. But the church, I find that to be disheartening. It's sad that we have come to a point where church is compared in terms of the price. Yeah. When Jesus Christ died for us freely, at no cost, that we are where we are. So for me, creative thinking is what is lacking currently in the church. The church is relevant. Whether it is occupying the right spot currently, I don't know. But until it occupies the right spot, it will remain irrelevant.
If you were put in charge to develop a minister or a pastor for the present time, what key characteristics would you require from that particular minister, pastor, to lead the Black people, particularly Black Christians?
You don't have all the answers. That's the first thing. The problem with ministers or priests, they come with the mentality that they know all the answers. One, you don't, if like those that I'm mentoring now, you don't have all the answers. You might be 2 steps ahead, but you are 2 steps ahead in theology. not 2 steps ahead in all disciplines of life. There is somebody in your congregation who is an economist, who is 5 steps ahead of you. There's somebody in your church who is a medical doctor, who's 10 steps ahead of you. There's an engineer. You come into the space to contribute according to your ability, not that you've got all the answers. Number 1. Number 2 is simplicity. I will tell the person to move in the direction of simplicity, because there is nothing as humbling as meeting the lowest of the community and they appreciate you as a priest. That, when I was still a priest in a congregation, I will have collect shoes and give to the poor. And people used to be angry at me because I'll collect shoes from Methodists and give to strangers. I'm like, but why are you not giving to Methodists? But Methodists needs to take care of their own poor people. And so the more people fought me about the program, the more the shoes grew, because I'll put it on social media and shoes will come from outside, not necessarily from the congregation. And I remember one day I was walking in town, and one time some guy in my age, came to me and hugged me. I was like, who this guy? And he says to me, I was at your church on Tuesday to collect shoes. I felt like a father when I gave them to my child. Wow. You did not give children, you did not give shoes to my children. You restored my manhood. Wow. I felt I could give my child a pair of shoes, And I think that's where we sometimes forget what it means to be simple. Just a pair of shoes of 250 rands can actually restore a man in his house, Thirdly, it's laziness. And a lot of people are lazy today. If you look at what we are producing for 8 hours at work, we're not, I mean, I always look at the colleagues. My father used to work for what was called Railway, Sportnet now. My father will tell you, I remember once I had a big debate with him about work. So my father loved playing cards. Yeah. So he came from work and I just arrived from work and I was very tired. And he said, let's play cards. And I said, Chief, I'm tired. Yeah. And he says, okay, tell me what you did today. I said to him, no, actually went to the office. Then I flew to Joburg, attended a meeting there. From there, I flew to Cape, had a meeting, and I just came home. Flew. So and he looked at me and said, so you were sitting the whole day? And I was carrying the rake, I was hitting the hammer. You come and tell me you're tired, Chief? Yeah. I did manual labor. You are just flying up and down. And that's the work ethic that we lack in today, especially with priests. Yeah. There are guys that I know, they only work on Saturday and Sunday because they're funerals, wedding, and communion. So the work ethic has gone off the window. People spend so much time on socials before they start working. So if I were to mentor a young minister, those are the 3 areas that I'll really zoom into, because laziness by itself, it's a curse. The inability, it's there in 1 Thessalonians. I think Paul talks to them and say, if a man will not eat, if a man will not work, he must not eat. Because laziness is a curse. A lot of people who are lazy today dressed nice. Yeah. There are lazy people who are dressed very expensive, driving. They look good, but very lazy. If you ask them the output of their work for the day, very minimal compared to the time they spent in the institution.
You don't know everything, simplicity, and work ethic / not being lazy are the 3 feedbacks that Motlhodi feels that are necessary to develop a leader that's going to be relevant in the Black community, especially if you are in the church. Shekinah left the church and the church went on without the presence of God. I am truly appreciative to Muruti for his feedback and his insights on the relevance of the Black church in the Black community. And I do trust that you are able to also pick up on some key pointers that will help you be relevant in the lives of those that you serve, whether as a Christian or purely as a spiritual person like myself. I mean, we were kicked out of church moons ago. But church is more like family. We've built relationships there. It's people that we know. We don't have beef. That's why we are able to sit and just laugh about our experiences in church and to continue to journey together outside of the orthodoxies of church and its demands to be divisive in our communities to a certain extent. Thank you very much for tuning in and joining us for our conversation today. Please remember to subscribe to our social media platforms, Instagram, Mkhulu M Makanya, TikTok, Mkhulu M Makanya, and Facebook, Mkhulu M Makanya. Remember to press your notification button and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much. It's Circles and Squares. It's a soul fit.